I apologize for the glare on my glasses. It's such a sunny day and I love the light coming in. And so I hope you can see me and see my eyes. One of the reason that I asked Phil to put that photograph on while we listen to that music, it's a photograph I took just the other day of Lake Fairley. And that image of the sunlight sparkling on water is one of my favorite sights in the world. I just come alive when I see that. I love it so much. It really just makes me feel so happy. And when you stare at those sparkling reflections, you can see that they're always moving and dancing. And if you try to stare at one sparkle, it doesn't stay still. It just keeps moving on the water. And I love that it's a reflection of the sun, and the sun being the star that is our star, that is the thing that allows us to have life on this earth, on this planet. And so it's this, for me, it's this beautiful reminder about how that shimmering, shining sparkliness, which is a reflection of something bigger, is also true of our lives. Something bigger than us and shimmering and shining all around us is also shimmering and shining in us. It's expansive and big, and it's also small and like one sparkle that lives inside. And I'm thinking about that because this is a time where we sometimes forget that we are sparkling inside. Life is dark, it's getting darker, and it's easy to forget who we are. But that something larger than us, that expansiveness, some people call God. Some of us believe that God is in every being and in every living thing. And for some people, the word God is loaded with so much history and so much negativity, and that is not a word that works in their understanding of this beauty that lives inside them. And for other people, there are other ideas to describe this something larger. Some people might use the idea of life force or love or wisdom or spirit. We may not know what to call it, but we know what it feels like. We know what it feels like when we can feel that presence of that inner essence inside of us. We know what it feels like when we feel sparkly. And we recognize it in other beings. We recognize it sometimes in our dog, in our family members, in our favorite tree. We recognize that sparkly inner light. Today is the 94th birthday of Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. And so in his honor, I was listening to a previously recorded interview with him. And he was talking about what he called our enlightened essence. And it immediately, when I heard those words, I thought of the sparkling light on the water. And I thought about the essence of that light living inside of us. And for him, enlightened essence is the definition of the word, the Buddhist term or the Sanskrit word, bodhisattva. And if you have studied Buddhism, you know that bodhisattva for some people is a term that is considered an enlightened teacher, a bodhisattva. But for some of us, the term is larger. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, every one of us has a bodhisattva inside of us, this enlightened essence. He said, every one of us has a bodhisattva waiting inside to grow. And I think that the waiting to grow part is about how we engage with that essence, how we engage with that God self, how we relate to the spirit or the bodhisattva within us. Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, a bodhisattva is a person who knows the art of listening. Listening is an art many people do not try, especially in listening to the struggles of others. One reason for that, he says, is that the listeners themselves are in so much pain. And so that in order to be able to listen, he says we need to learn to transform the suffering in ourselves by listening within. I knew that I wanted to talk this morning about deep listening within. And so I wanted my words and my ideas to be inspired by spending time in a lot of deep listening. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my experience this week of this practice. I started at the early part of the week, and I decided that I would sit and I would listen with all my being really hard and really earnestly, because that's how I like to do things, very earnestly. And I would listen and I would get advice and I would get wisdom and I would get inspiration, and it would be handed to me with all of the words I needed and all the imagery I needed. And so I sat for an hour, listening, breathing, coming back to my breath and my belly. In an hour, I got nothing. I got no wisdom. I got no inspiration, no funny stories, no beautiful imagery. So then I went into my own critical judge saying, well, you must not be very good at this. And what kind of a minister are you when you can't even listen deeply to your inner voice? The criticisms went on for a while. What's wrong with you? Why can't you open to the wisdom of the divine inside and all around you? All of that continued for a little while. It didn't feel very good. And so I said, well, I'm just gonna go for a walk. So I went walking and I ended up down by the lake, which is where I saw the sparkly water. And I wondered at that point, with just a little distance between me and my self-importance, I wondered if maybe the divine or the spiritual realm or even the spiritual side of me was on a slightly different timeline than I am, and maybe had something to say, but not within that hour that I set aside to listen. And then I wondered if perhaps the silence that I was met with when I was listening was the message to simply be still, just to be open. Not to be open because I need something, but just to be open to the possibility of connecting with myself and the spirit of love that's inside me. I also realized that for a while anyway, I do have a meditation practice, but I'm not sure that I have really showed up to listen deeply for a while. And so I think that perhaps that muscle was not strong, and that anything that we do regularly is practice. And that if we want to be good at something like listening within, we have to show up. We have to practice that muscle, just like any other muscle that we want to strengthen. If we want to strengthen our leg muscles, we might run, or our arm muscles, we might row. And we show up for our practice. And showing up for practice is what spiritual practices are. Spiritual practices are something that Unitarian Universalists sometimes struggle with because we come from different theologies and different beliefs. We aren't always schooled in this way of teaching ourselves and having spiritual practice. But spiritual teachings and encouragement to spirit nourishing practices are an important part of our faith tradition and our faith community. Two of our Unitarian Universalist principles point to this. One of our principles says, the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. The other principle is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So I encourage us as Unitarian Universalists to embrace the idea and the opportunity for spiritual practice. We live in a world that is very loud, a world where many, many people are talking at us. This world around us, this outer world, is full of advice from commentators, experts, news reporters, actors, authors, politicians, people with opinions, theories, things to say. We spend our formative years in institutions of education that train us in hearing words, digesting information, and having the right answer. We often come to believe that information and wisdom and answers come from outside of us, from other people, from experts. And many of us have people in our lives, in our families, that are very skilled at giving us advice and telling us what they think. And because of all of that noise, all of the way we're trained in this culture, we're not taught to look inside ourselves or listen deeply to the wisdom that lives there. In a way that is, as our poet this morning said, swimming against the current, swimming upstream against what culture says, to listen to our own voice. I'm not suggesting that you don't listen to other people or that you don't listen to the voices of experts or research. But what I am suggesting is a more balanced playlist. Listening to what other people have to say and running it through your own system of wisdom and deep knowing and seeing what resonates with you. I do want to acknowledge in this practice of deep listening within that some of the voices we carry that are loud in our minds can be unkind, cruel, and critical. Sometimes these are the harsh voices of people from our lives, from our past. Sometimes it's our parents, our grandparents, our siblings, other institutions that have put messages into our mind that said, you are not enough, you are not okay, you are defective. These are voices of our wounds. And it's okay. They are there. That is not the voice I'm talking about. When you listen to your own still, small voice, you go beyond the voice of your wounds. When I hear those critical voices, I think they feel like they're more in my mind. They're up here. And when I want to come more deeply into the mind, I want to hear a deeper voice, I can imagine myself bringing those voices, those ears actually, down into my core so that I can hear from my heart and I can hear from my gut and I can hear from my spirit. If your voice that you're hearing when you're quiet is critical and harsh, that isn't your bodhisattva speaking. That is not your God essence. Keep listening. I was talking about deep listening with someone dear to me the other day, and she said, sometimes I can't tell the difference between my voice of intuition and my voice of fear. Like, I don't know which one is the wise one. And I understand that because sometimes when we're silent, the voices of fear tell their stories in our minds. And those voices can be very loud and they can drown out that small, quiet voice deep down inside. But remember that fear and criticism speak from a limitedness, from a tightness, and those are not the voices of your inner voice that is expansive and courageous. But I will say that sitting in silence can be uncomfortable because it's not always just a joyful moment of hearing singing coming from your heart, because you sometimes will be there with those voices of fear and criticism. And sometimes it's so uncomfortable to be silent. But I will tell you, sometimes, even though you want to run, if you can stay for 2 seconds with those chaotic and also silent voices, when yesterday you could only stay for 1 second, you're practicing and strengthening that muscle of listening within. Even if you don't have a practice of stillness and intentional listening, we are all guided by this inner wisdom. We do it without thinking about it, without struggling, without that earnestness. Author Courtney Martin says this: I don't think it's just me. It's one of those marvelous human foibles we have, most of us, she says. They are awesome instincts. If we listen hard enough to our own hearts, we notice when the whispers become fervent little screams. That's what I want more of. That's what I crave to understand. That's the kind of person, mountain, book I want to be near. That's the way I want to feel. We recognize this. We are drawn towards certain things that make us feel more whole, more content, more alive. That is the intuition, the wisdom that we have that guides us. This deep listening to our inner voice is to live an invitation to expand our generosity, this generous way of being in the world that sustains us. This generosity that is offering yourself your own wisdom and gracefully receiving your wisdom and trusting yourself and that wisdom and appreciating your own guidance. Living this way is both expansive and grounding at the same time. It is feeling the freedom of your own wings and the solidity of your own roots. And the thing that I want to really emphasize is that a spiritual practice, one of which this is very simple, it is being still and listening, is not a superfluous extra thing to squeeze into your life. It's not something separate from life. These spiritual practices are what allow us to have a life that is founded on, rooted in love, courage, resilience, and strength. So I'm going to invite you for just a moment to close your eyes and imagine those sparkles dancing on the water. That movement, that flow, that sparkle, that reflection. Know that that divine and human miracle of light and shimmer is you. You are that. Breathe that in, that truth. And go forward, bringing with you that bodhisattva inside. So may it be. Thank you.